That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win.
It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit.
I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger.
Let's just start here. We don't need to do introductions anymore. Like, it's the pump, and if you don't know what the pump is, you probably don't want to listen to this anyways. But if you want to learn what the pump is, then I guess you should probably listen. But we got Jeremy Bell and Christian Thibaudeau. I tried practicing it in French, and it just
that sounded much better.
Pretty good, man.
That was pretty good. Thibaudeau. There you go.
That grade 8 French class. Back.
I only had in grade 4 and 5, but yeah. What? So we had you guys on last time, sans like no jeb, and we basically talked meathead myths, and we just kind of ripped through a bunch. And then just like how I normally get guests is I go on Facebook and make fun of people, and then I tag either Chris or Jeremy or whoever else, and then I'm like, yeah, you have to come on and talk about it. But yeah. Welcome back. Let's just start here because I'm kind of interested. Jeremy and Chris, both things have changed because now COVID. Kind of what's going on right now with you, Jeremy, and just the gym? Because I know you made a big move since last time.
Yeah, so last time we talked, I was training at a private facility that was centered mostly around training athletes, some general population too. And since COVID, kind of, things had to change. And when COVID kind of started to kick off, I kind of foresaw it and started to compile gym equipment, knowing that, there's obviously going to be a long shutdown and layoff. So we ended up moving into a place that had a pretty big garage. And yeah, I have a gym in my garage now, and I'm training, 4 to 6, 7 clients a day in the garage. And
dude, you're underselling this. No, I'm gonna redo this for you. You basically got a bunch of dudes locally to build wooden racks and shit, bought like all this like old bodybuilding equipment, and was like, I'm gonna like ask all the dudes that with tattoos and want to bodybuild to come to my gym. And you made and then you named it after the ghetto in your city.
Rutland Barbell. But yeah, I mean, really the transition for me is in Edmonton. I trained a lot of athletes, and I'm basically training guys like me, guys that just want to get after training, love training, want to get huge, want to be healthy, and want to learn about training. So it's one of those interesting things where, like, the longer you're a trainer, you realize I don't really like training people that aren't like me. I like training people that are like me. They're easy, and I can just share all the stuff that I'm passionate about. So yeah, we got a good thing going, training a lot of bodybuilders and dudes from 25 to 40 that want to also learn about how they can kind of get the most out of their training, their hormones, everything. So it's a cool environment. Take your shirt off, listen to loud music, yell, scream. You don't get in trouble. It's sweet.
Yeah, and I actually trained there, and I felt like you actually got stronger from the last time I seen you. I was like, fuck, Jeremy's keeping up with me.
A little bigger too, man. I'm like I'm knocking on the door at 220. So
at that point, I was still like 230, so I still had you, but now you're actually almost bigger than me. It was just
I learned how to eat.
It's sad if anyone knows us from the past.
When we played football together, I was like 170 some pounds. So
you probably thought you were way bigger then than you feel like you are now.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Funny story. We had Stu on the podcast, and he was like, I don't know, Jeremy's like really into bodybuilding right now. I'm like, hey. And he like sent me this picture, like, does he really think he's that big? I'm like, listen, here's a picture of Jeremy when we played. And he was like, oh, he was a DB.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I get it. I'm like, yeah, like, this is really good for Jeremy. Like, he's massive. This is massive, Jeremy.
Do you think I was a linebacker or a safety or something? Just like
he thought you were like, like a linebacker. He didn't understand that you were literally like, you were in grade 11 for 10 years.
Like in the States, I might not have even made the senior team.
No.
Lots of compliment.
Yeah, it was actually good. I changed his mind. Yeah, he wasn't even making fun of you. He was like, I love Jeremy's shit. He's just like, dude, he's only 220. I'm like, dude, it's like 60 pounds heavier. Chris, what's been going on? I know the shutdowns are happening over there. Like, that's pretty recent. So like, what's going on with you?
Well, to be honest, of all the places where there was a shutdown and lockdown, I'm probably the least affected person because I've been like social distancing for about 30 years from now. If anything, it actually makes me feel better to know that everybody is in the same situation as I am in, that I've been all my life. So I don't feel as weird as I am, right? Also, actually, since most of my business is online now, most of the clients I'm training are online because they are far away. That didn't change that much. Most of them still have access to a training facility, so that's not a big issue. I think that the only downside was that I had to cancel lots of seminars. I had like 20 seminars planned for like the past year or so and the upcoming year, and we had to cancel them. So that's of course a big money loss. But on the bright side, it means I'm spending a lot more time with my son, and that actually allowed me to have sex again.
Yeah.
So we do have another one on the way.
What is that?
Good.
You have another one on the way.
Yeah. A little girl.
Damn.
Oh yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, me too. That's so COVID. We just had more sex is what we came down to.
That's a win.
My wife won't listen to that, but she's in the other room. She's like, shut the fuck up.
Your wife has she ever listened to any podcast? My wife has never even started.
She listens to the ones where I've made fun of her, and like she's always just like listen to that one, and she didn't know.
She has like an instinct that you're talking behind her back, and she listened only to those.
Absolutely. Like, that's.
I think my wife unsubscribed from my email list
because half the posts are about her.
No, none of them are.
Yeah, that's cool. So with just interesting on the other end. So with the seminars is like, because I saw you make it a push for like essentially new programming on the Tib Army stuff. That's kind of like the new direction kind of that you're kind of bolstering just in.
Well, we already were selling programs, but basically every 6 months I do change the offering because first I evolve when it comes to. I'm always trying to get better, right? So the programs are slightly different, and of course we need to push more on the online market to compensate for the loss in income from the seminars. But that's actually doing pretty well. So honestly, it's pretty much par for the course. Yeah, I made like a golf joke here, par for the course.
Yeah.
So, I'm actually done with golfing. The season is over now. So I got back to serious training again 2 weeks ago. And I'm already bigger than Jeremy is. So, I mean, it's pretty, I'm 218 right now, so I'm winning.
I want to put this out there, though. It's like you got an indoor golf simulator so that the season was never over. So you just gave up.
No, I'm actually still. What I'm doing is I'm training every other day, right?
Yeah.
So with lifting, and the other days I'm doing speed work for golf. So it's not like I'm swinging, but it's with over speed work, with plyometric, with grip work. So it's training, but applied to the swing. My training in itself is not sports specific. I just want to rebuild the muscle I've lost. While training to golfing. So when I'm figuring if I'm increasing my size, but I'm still practicing the speed work, I won't lose the mobility to be able to swing. At first, I needed to lose the mass because I needed to be able to swing again as soon as possible. But now I can focus on rebuilding the muscle while maintaining the mobility.
I actually have a question here. And maybe you have an answer because like I know a guy that's like pretty big. Jeremy, you would have. I don't know if you worked with Dietrich, but anyways, he's like a super athlete and he does like a lot of endurance stuff. But he's like huge. He's like 230 and jacked. But it makes endurance stuff harder. So he's like, I just need to lose muscle. And like, how hard is that to actually do? Like for real with certain sports like that? Because you said it with golf and it would totally hinder it. But you can't just lose it. You'd have to. How did you go about doing that?
Well, actually, what actually helped me is that I have shitty genetics. So if I stop training, it's actually
pretty good genetics. So that's yeah.
It's pretty easy for me to lose muscle if I don't train hard. And also in the past, it's not the first time I lost muscle on purpose. At one point when I had my health issues for the first time, when I had cardiac problems after I got a virus attacked the heart after my honeymoon and stuff like that. I needed to lower my body weight, even if it was just muscle body weight, to lower the strain on the heart. And simply by doing intermittent fasting, I actually dropped muscle. even if I was still training. So, I mean, that's why I believe that intermittent fasting is actually pretty good to get leaner, but it sucks if you want to build muscle, or even if you want to maintain muscle, it's not ideal. So just eating less protein, eating less often. I do produce a shit ton of adrenaline during the day, which means I'm also producing tons of cortisol. That's just how I am. I'm a nervous person. So that will actually facilitate losing muscle. So if I don't train, it's even more pronounced. 2 or 3 times in the past, I've been able to lose like 15 pounds of muscle simply by eating less and not training.
So
I remember a buddy of mine. A buddy of mine interviewed Batista when he was trying to like break into acting, trying to follow The Rock's. And at that time, they were telling The Rock to get smaller. But so he's like, I literally stopped training, just did jujitsu, didn't lift weights, was just doing cardio, like cut my food way down. And he's like, and I couldn't get below 260. He's like, it just, and you talk about genetics. That's a guy who's just a, monster. He's like, nothing worked. He's like, I just couldn't. He's like, so I gave up and just like, fuck it, I'll be big. Yeah,
Arnold had the same thing. He needed to lose weight to do the movies at first. In his first Conan movie, he was 215. So Jeremy, you actually are bigger than Arnold.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I ever wanted.
Well, you don't ever want to lose muscle, like.
No, man. But I'm the same as Chris. Like, it's so easy for me to lose mass if I am not on point with food or sleep or stress management. Like, I feel like when I actually diet for a show, like that'll be the easy part. The eating enough food to put on mass is always the hard part for me, and just staying calm enough. But that's, interestingly enough, lately the last 2 months, I've slept the best. I've napped more. I'm the most calm that I've been in years, and I put on, a decent amount of mass. There was other things that assisted that, but not much. And so
when Dean and I came back from, like, when we're in Costa Rica, both of us were maxing out our calories. I was stuck at like 205 for months, and then come back from Costa Rica, get locked down into COVID. I'm up to 215 in like 6-7 weeks. It was great. Yeah. And then I was like, all right, I kind of feel like shit, and I'm a little too fat. So I was like, all I did is stopped eating garbage. Like, cause I have to eat garbage to gain weight. Stopped eating garbage. I'm like lucky to hit 195 today. Like, it's just like, I'm the same way. It's just like
exact same way. Like I gained the 240. Like I was like trying to get as big as possible. Let's see if this can happen. It was super hard. I'd eat like shit. It was the worst. Leave Costa Rica, COVID hits, and I like just stopped counting calories. So basically stopped eating junk food to get my calories up. Same thing, dropped 20 pounds. But I'm weird in the sense that like now I'm doing jiu-jitsu and I'll lift twice a week. I can't lose, like I'm 222 no matter what. If I eat fucking 4,000 calories, 5,000 calories, or 2,000 calories, I can't move. And it's like, so I'm like, not that I want to lose muscle because I don't. I'm like actually totally fine. But I'm like, I don't think I could if I tried. Like I'd have to literally do nothing.
Everybody has a set point, right? I mean, me, my normal body weight, and it's been like 210 for years. And it's weird because I will actually, if I stop training, for example, for golf, I'll still be 210. I don't look fatter, but I look fucking smaller, right? Which is weird because I'm the exact same body weight.
Muscle tone, right?
So when I'm in shape, it will go up like to 217, 218. But it looks like I gain a lot more than that. So it's kind of, I have my set body weight and my body just wants to be there.
I think it's that intramuscular fluid versus like the an intracellular, like you get the pump.
It could be just you're feeling more inflated. By the way, just one observation, because Jeremy, when you mentioned that you're like me, and first of all, you're not like me, right? Nobody is like me. But
now was way faster.
Yeah, I got more hair than you.
But honestly, what I noticed is that one point where we are alike is we actually have the same head shape. And I noticed that people with a longer head and like a smaller head, they actually lose muscle easier than people with that big round and big neck head. And that might be genetic. But
I mean, we always said that in fighting is like a guy with a big head or a big neck is hard to knock out too.
Yeah. And one research I've done is that people with a genetically bigger neck have higher testosterone levels. And that's why it's actually associated with strength and fighting power. Not just because a bigger neck makes you better at sustaining hits and being able to get out of the ground game, but actually indicates you have higher testosterone levels because you have more androgen receptors in the neck muscles and traps. So for example, when someone gets on steroids, one of the first things that blows up are the traps and neck. And it's funny because at first when people talked about that, I said, well, that's bullshit. But I've done some research and there's actually good science behind that you have more androgen receptors and also greater androgenic receptor expression in the neck and trap area. And it would make sense from a survival perspective because it's a good way for female to know which males have a higher testosterone level would be at. So one of the telltale signs that someone is on steroids would be simply looking at the neck and traps because they will become bigger faster than every other muscle group.
Yeah, me, like when I jumped on for the first few times, my traps and my delts grew exponentially more. And I barely train my delts now and they just respond. Like they just grow.
I wonder if I have not been able to find if there's any research on androgen receptors of the delt. I suspect that it might be true, but one thing I think is two things. First, of course, steroids will increase water retention and they increase sodium and potassium retention, which will increase both intramuscular and extracellular fluid retention. And the shoulders being such a complex musculature, you have a lot more compartment to store water, so it will blow up very easily. The other point is that the shoulder is involved in pretty much every single upper body movement. Even when you're curling, when you're doing tricep extension, some part of the delts are working. So they receive a lot more stimulation. If you're natural, you might not be able to recover from that stress. So that's why lots of natural actually have stubborn shoulders because they probably are overworked versus their capacity to recover. But when you take anabolic steroids, which will increase your capacity to recover and rebuild muscle damage, then that extra stimulation might lead to faster growth. But definitely the whole yoke area is the best telltale sign that somebody's on. In my opinion.
That's what I noticed with natural bodybuilders too, is their shoulders tend to be a weak point and their arms tend to be a strong point. And you know, arms are easy to recover. They're probably not smashing arms every upper body workout like they are, or at least not to the extent and damage that those shoulders are. So it makes sense.
And in fact, the study I referenced earlier about the androgen receptors of the neck, they've actually found that the limbs have the lowest concentration of androgenic receptors. And you're totally correct. When you look at a true natural bodybuilders, their arms can actually somewhat compete to many with many enhanced bodybuilders. Not the Olympia guys, of course.
Right.
But it still looks pretty close to what an enhanced bodybuilder would have. But the shoulders, straps, they actually, in a shirt, they look super narrow.
Yeah.
Just because they need to rely on the definition to give the illusion of size at the shoulder level. Same thing with the legs, right? You very rarely will you see a natural bodybuilder with jacked legs in competition shape.
Right. You'll see it off season. You'll be like, man, that dude's got big legs. But you're right. When they get into competition shape, you're like, hey, especially because we see the freaks now. I mean, legs now are freaky on low-level competitors. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull up a picture of Ryan, like our buddies and like Lifetime Natural, but he's like fucking massive.
Well, you know, Salazar is a great point. Our friend Eric, who's, you know, he's what, 142 pounds or something. Stage weight, looks massive.
I know. Yeah.
You know,
his arms look just
his
huge.
arms are
like,
insane.
What the?
Who's this?
And then the
Eric Salazar.
Oh yeah.
Weight vest.
Funny thing is too, I saw one of his posts recently, and he's like, you know, I enjoy drinks frequently, this and that, and you're like, holy shit, man! Like your genetics are pretty fucking unreal. Like, you know, one interesting thing that I've seen recently with a lot of people I've been working with, been exposed to just more dudes looking to get jacked, is, you know how there's always this debate on Instagram. You're like, is that guy natty? Is he not? And you know, most times you see anyone that looks, you know, in reasonably good shape, you're gonna think,
steroids.
Okay, he's using something, steroids. But you know, it's funny, and I used to be that guy that it's probably a jealousy thing where I'd be like, oh yeah, he's using a ton of gear. That's why he's bigger than me, right? But I've come across a few guys lately that I can see why, like, their genetics are so good. They look like they're on gear. They look as good as some
Dude,
guys on
we
gear,
played football
190,
with them.
200 pounds. You know what? I'm like, okay, it's possible. It's possible to look this way. I just didn't see those freaks with my own eyes for so long.
Yep.
And I mean, I always have this conversation with people, you know, they talk about, you know, some of the high level open bodybuilders. I'm like, look, man, like those guys, a lot of them were natural 230, 240 pound freaks. And like, they looked better than anyone. Then they started doing juice. They're like 18 years old, 230 pounds. They just look freakish. And also the interesting thing is people think those guys do the most amount of drugs. They usually do pretty modest amount of drugs because they don't need to do a lot because their genetics are so superior and they probably respond really well to the drugs. It's such an interesting paradigm when you actually
know that
to
too, even
it.
from when we were playing sports. Is like, it's like, I think we talked about this with Stu, but it's just like when you play with certain guys in football, like we're all good, we're all at university, and then there's like a few dudes that are just like, they don't try or whatever, and they just fucking wreck you. It's like we see it firsthand because we had to get hit in the face by them. So I know
I went to recruit camp at Penn State, and so all the like top U.S. recruits in the country were there, and I was pretty good, and I showed up there. And I was just like, what the fuck am I doing? I have no business in this room. Like, I mean, the kid that one of my kids I became friends with, Joe Paterno would come and sit at our breakfast table every morning and ask him to come to Penn State. And he'd be like, nah, I just want to play somewhere where it's warm. like, I'm thinking maybe Florida State, Florida.
Those guys are like, and I use football players because that's our thing. But remember, we train those like athletes. Remember, Jeremy and I ran like this, I don't know, like a charity project, but it wasn't. Like we basically gave free training to a bunch of high school athletes. One of them went on to the States from Canada. The other one was John. Remember the running back, stocky running back? He could have been a bodybuilder the second he left high school.
Well,
never deadlifted before, did like 550 for reps, and we're like, what the fuck? Like,
well, he played as an 18-year-old at the U of A. So I mean, that tells you everything you want to know.
But he looked like a stocky. He could have been a bodybuilder if he would have. And it's just like, there's dudes. I have
a guy I'm training right now. He's natural. He looks as good as a lot of my guys that are on. And I'm like, man, please, I'll make you a pro. Just please let me make you a pro. Like your genetics, like we all wish we had them. And he's so nonchalant about it. Like he kind of goes back and forth between powerlifting and then he wants to bodybuild a bit, but he never fully commits. But like every time I see one of my guys that hasn't seen him in a while, they'll be like, is Damien on a cycle now? I'm like, no, man. like he's like, not, but I wish. Like,
Chris, you probably, not that you need to see, but like you've dealt with like Olympians and stuff, so you've seen it over the years. Like, what's your take on it? Because like I know what your take's on it, but like I'm interested in some stories here.
Well, to be honest, I mean, when you've worked, especially with football players, you're right in mentioning football because the biggest freaks I've seen when it comes to muscle mass and strength are football players, and oftentimes not even the pros, because those who have the genetic to build more muscle and be stronger, normally they don't have the skill set to reach the NFL or the CFL. One guy I've trained, he was he played in BC and then he played in Winnipeg, right? And offensive lineman. He was only 6 feet tall, but at his heaviest body weight, he was 323, and he ran 4.8740, like electronic, like just a freak. And his max bench press was 535. Everybody, and he had a vein on his biceps. It wasn't fat, right? It's not super lean, but not fat. And people said, "Well, Carl is on steroids." Dude, after his last year in Vancouver, he came up to me in the gym and said, "Christian, like very hush, right? That's my contract here, and I need a good season. I'm thinking, could I maybe start like a cycle of creatine?" The guy was not even taking. He was not even taking protein. And people ask me, what did you do for his bench press? I mean, he was bench pressing over 500. I said, dude, what I did was that when he was 15 years old, he was bench pressing 315 for 6 reps. When he was 18, he was strict military pressing 315 for 6 reps. I mean, he was just born like that, just a freak. So a guy like Steven Jackson, who played for the Rams, right? like 6'2", 6'3", 245,
Yoked.
8% body fat.
Yeah.
The guy basically did not lift. He came to us just for injury recovery during the season, and we asked him because we wanted to keep him like for the off season, right? So what do you do off season? Well, I do some jogging, maybe do some push-ups here and there. The guy is 245. So that a guy like
Sounds
that
like
is
Bo
not gonna take
Jackson.
steroids. He doesn't even train. So
Yeah.
if I lift, I get too big. If I
That's
get
Ray,
too big,
Ray Lewis, I would do plyometrics before the season, but I had to stop that because I would get too big. And he's like at his mama's house. He's like,
Look at Derrick Henry. I bet Derrick Henry doesn't train that hard.
probably Herschel Walker. I mean, Herschel Walker did.
Herschel
did
Walker
train hard,
push-ups
but
and
not
sit-ups.
lifting.
Yeah.
Just push up and
That's
sit
it.
up.
And Bo Jackson was the same way, wasn't he?
he only
Like,
trained when he hurt his hip.
when he hurt his hip. Then he
Yeah.
was like, oh, maybe I should lift.
Yeah.
To rehab.
But then we look at like a lot of the high level boxers. I mean, it wasn't until was it Holyfield that hired Fred Hatfield, I
Hatfield.
think, finally,
Yeah.
and that was kind of when strength training picked up. I don't know about you. I've never seen Mike Tyson in a weight training session. I'm sure there was something, but it wasn't a crux of his. And that dude looks like a bodybuilder.
But he's so
Yeah.
traps.
Just doing like,
Dude,
Yeah.
traps.
All traps, absolutely.
Wasn't he? I heard recently that he was being given not Anadrol.
I know they do
Maybe
check drops
Anadrol?
before fights.
it was
Yeah. And a
check drops,
couple
exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Man. Like Don
I mean,
King
I'm
was
sure there was
just flipping
D-ball
on
in his
stuff.
breakfast, but
Yeah. Well,
I
actually,
mean,
saw
I'm
him
sure
recently
Castor
doing some training.
Mata was up there like, oh, let's just crunch up a little bit of this.
Well,
and
just
throw
take
it
this
in there.
vitamin, you'll be good. East German
Well,
shit.
But if you've seen him when he was like 14, he looked the same way.
I know.
And that's, have you seen this kid, Nick Walker, that just kind of broke out, New York
Yeah.
Open? He's
Yeah.
talking like he's 16 and he's 230, like walking
know.
around high school, but
Yeah.
when he was natural. And he's like, and
Yeah.
the second I did my first bodybuilding competition, like at 17, right when I graduated high school, I did my first cycle. And I mean, the guy is a fucking
That's the guy you
freak
said.
now.
Well, look at
Yeah, that's the guy I
Bumstead,
sent
like-
you the pictures of.
Yeah, like Chris Bumstead. I mean, again, it's just so fascinating to me. You look at these guys, and he literally, his coach Ian, who's one of the biggest freaks ever too, they were kind of talking about on his story, like, what does Chris do? And he was like, man, he does like 500 tests in the off season. Like, he can't do more because he would get too big, like to be in classic. Like, he's that much of a freak that like you just can't do that much stuff because of the genetics.
Well, and there's also there's not just the genetics of natural muscle building, but there's the genetics of how your body actually reacts with the drugs
Responds.
too, which is
Yeah.
two totally different things.
Yeah, which is a really interesting thing. You don't realize that until you helped enough people with them and which compounds work well for them. Like me, DHTs. My body loves DHTs. Like I just do really well with them, and so it's interesting.
Well, and I think part of the thing is, if we're going to go down this road, like let's just start, saying there. First of all, let's make a disclaimer that this is all for recreational purposes only. We're just hypotheticals here. But when we start talking about, people talk about steroids as this panacea of like, hey, you're just going to take this stuff. But if you're not educated on what they do and the reason they were developed and the purpose for each of them, you're really not going to make good choices, first of all. And it's when you see, especially like powerlifters and some of these people having been in strongman, seeing like the things they do, you're like, what is your, like, why are you taking this? Like, what is the purpose of this individual drug for you? And I think this is where we can kind of talk about the, especially Chris, you've worked with a lot of athletes, like the neurological aspects of certain drugs versus the physiological aspects.
Yeah. Well, that's such an important point. I mean, it seems in bodybuilding, like people just throw in every drug in the mix and they don't know what does what, right? And to me, nowhere is it more evident than with trenbolone use. Okay? Trenbolone, in my opinion, is one of to be honest, the worst drugs possible to build muscle. It's actually not that anabolic.
Good at keeping muscle.
Times most for two reasons. First, because it's very anti-catabolic. So when you're dieting down, it can actually protect your muscle better than pretty much everything else. But more importantly, it actually has a dramatic recomposition or visual effect because it shifts where the water is being retained. It's actually diuretic. So trenbolone would make you flush a lot of water. But more importantly, because it's highly androgenic, it will increase the sensitivity of the beta-adrenergic receptors, the receptors interacting with adrenaline, especially at the muscle level. So if your body responds more to adrenaline at the muscle level, it makes you stronger. But for bodybuilders, more importantly, it actually increases muscle tone even at rest. So that's what we call like the Tren look. Like dry, hard, and looking like you carve out a stone, because it flushes out the water, but it also increases muscle tone by making the receptors more sensitive to adrenaline, meaning that even with extremely low adrenaline level, the muscles still get hard. So that's what gives you that trend. If you have someone who's like mildly in shape, like 10% body fat, you give them a Tren injection, like a decent one at night, the next day they look like a different human being, just because of the instant impact on muscle tone and the dehydration effect, okay? But the problem is that with the dehydration comes a lot of kidney stress.
Right.
So it's actually the only steroid that is actually directly impacting kidneys. I mean, lots of steroids will have an impact on the kidneys because of the increase in water, increase in blood pressure. But the trenbolone will actually directly impact the kidneys. But when it comes to like the steroids impact on the nervous system, and that's such an important point, because you can actually take steroids without even training and gain benefits from them, because it makes you more responsive to adrenaline. And that's why it increases strength. Because when adrenaline binds to the beta-adrenergic receptors at the muscle site, it makes those muscles contract harder, contract faster, and also decrease the protective inhibition, allowing you to produce more force, using more of your potential strength. So if you take trenbolone, if you take allotestin, anadrol, anything that is highly androgenic testosterone will increase strength immediately, even without adding muscle mass at that point.
Well, that's why it's a huge jug of powerlifters. But it's kind of interesting when we talked about natural guys who just fucking like Mike and Mike Tyson, all these people. It's like they have that switch turned off automatic or turned on just all the time, and then these unnatural guys taking Tren, they're trying to turn that switch on externally, and then they just get stronger. It's seemingly within weeks, and like you said, a lot of that's neurological.
Yeah, I mean, look at something like T-ball, which is not really looked at as a, super strong steroid, but you see athletes like John Jones getting busted for it. Well, why would you give that to an MMA fighter? Because it has such a great neurological effect. It's going to actually make you more responsive. It's going to make you a better athlete.
It was the most popular steroid in East Germany.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Remember the East German swim team, the women?
Yeah.
Like they came out with.
Really?
Yeah, it's basically like turinable OT is basically Dynabol without the water retention. So it's as strong Dynabol from a performance standpoint, but you don't get the extra body weight from the water retention.
See, they don't talk about that.
Yeah, and I've heard people compare it, like I heard someone compare it the other day. It's almost like an oral form of Tren. I think they're saying that because of some of the strength gains you get, but I like T-ball personally. I think, I would actually rather have someone, if they're trying to put on mass, use that than use Tren. And like you said, Chris, like so many guys, they conflate the information. They think that Tren is this really great bulking steroid. And I haven't seen good success with that. Like I have so many guys that come to me and they want to take it. And a lot of times, I'm like, okay, well, we can try it. But, I just have not seen the kind of results in just pure mass as a more basic cycle with something like DECA, and a little bit of T-ball.
Anabolic. It doesn't build muscle; it protects the muscle. But the fact that it actually changed your look so fast, you think it's powerful at build. I think someone, if you just wake up in the morning and you take 5 pounds of fat off of your body, you will swear to God that you're bigger.
You got bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Because you look more, and Tren will make you look more muscular, but it doesn't build that much muscle.
But only if you're lean enough, right? Like exactly. That's the thing is I have some guys that are, like they're in their off season. One guy is about 5'8", he's 215 pounds. He's a little soft because he's eating a lot of food and he's at that point. And he I think envisioned when he did the Tren that all of a sudden it would just harden him, make him vascular, and give him that look of all the guys on Instagram. You know what I mean? And I'm like, look, man, that's just not what this is going to do. And I told you that, but
it's the same. Honestly, you're talking about this like diet information and fucking workout information on Instagram. It's the same shit.
Any of those
Again,
appear.
I think that's why it's important to come back to going through the history of these things and actually looking at the structure of them. Why was trenbolone created? Like I grew up working on farms. You know why Finaplex was used? You take cattle and they're feeder cattle, and you have to put them in a truck and send them across the country to get slaughtered. And if they lose weight, you lose money.
Yeah.
And so what you do is they put these Finaplex pellets in the cattle so that they retain all their muscle while they don't get to eat for however long they travel, or they eat very little. And so that it was technically developed for cattle to maintain muscle mass. It wasn't meant to make them bigger. If it was bigger, you'd be putting it in their feed during the year. No, you're just retaining that on the way there. And I think that's why, if we miss the purpose of why things are made, we can't understand why they would be used.
And you look at those pellets, most of the time, the trenbolone or the Finaplex, which was used to fatten up the cattle to increase their body weight, it was mixed with estrogen.
Right. And that's the other thing, is guys are all pumping in AIs and thinking estrogen is a bad thing while trying to gain weight.
Estrogen is actually anabolic because it increases IGF-1 levels. I mean, if you kill estrogen, well, first of all, you will have no sex for the 6 months to come. When estrogen is down, it's not the only thing that's down and stays down. But it will kill IGF-1 levels, which is the most anabolic hormone in the body. So again, estrogen control is important if you have serious side effect, but certainly you don't want to kill it. Just like cortisol, you don't want to kill cortisol because you need it to
mobilize energy. Yeah, that's an interesting topic too. Like, how many guys, like I'm sure Chris and Dean and Jeb, like you guys have had guys come to you, and from a former coach, they're like, this is what I was taking, this is what he was telling me to do, and the blatant overuse of AIs it's downright dangerous. I mean, we know how harsh like Arimidex, for example, is on your cholesterol, right? Like, it's no good. And I don't think people have any idea. They just think it's this pill that's kind of the safety net, and it doesn't have any consequences or effects on the body like, taking a bunch of steroids does. But if you're taking 7 Arimidex a week, I mean, like, what is that doing to you?
The amount
I've seen
of blatant,
this many times. I'm like, what?
Well, the misuse of drugs on the internet is almost more rampant than like the misuse of shitty nutrition techniques and stuff. And it's sometimes more dangerous. And you're like, okay, listen, if you got this off of fucking forum on bodybuilding.com, it's probably like, don't do it.
TRT clinics are prescribing AIs.
Yeah.
TRT on a level dose of, keeping you at like 900, test levels are prescribing AIs.
Ever. Like, especially if you take Proviron or something like that helps just squash a little bit of estrogen, like these other drugs that are less harsh on you, it just doesn't make sense, man. It's crazy. But I mean, that's a whole nother topic. Is you should hear some of the horror stories from clients going to the doctor and having TRT prescribed to them, and the protocols that they're given by their GPs. Yeah. It's like, take 1 shot of Test C, 100 milligrams every 2 weeks or something. It's
or
like
a month.
Like, what? Makes that worse. You're going to be worse. It's just horrible.
But, I was on a steroid panel at the Swiss Symposium years ago. And one thing I mentioned is that actually most of the serious side effects from PED will come mostly from the ancillaries. It will come from the AI. It will come from the fat loss drug, clenbuterol. It will come from thyroid medication. It also comes from the recreational drug use that often comes with bodybuilding. Because here's the thing, right? Androgens increase the sensitivity of the beta-adrenergic receptors, which I mentioned earlier. So it makes you a lot more likely to become addicted to anything that stimulates those receptors, like speed, like amphetamines, like clenbuterol. And
what
now,
about
what happened? Pardon?
Oreos. I'm addicted to Oreos.
So what happened? And the problem is, I mean, that's the work. And most of the serious side effect, cardiovascular side effect, will come from a combination of anabolic steroids and stimulants. Because if you have the heart, also has beta-androgenic receptors. So if you're taking androgens, the heart also is more responsive to adrenaline, meaning that when you stimulate those receptors, the heart beats faster and it beats more strongly, which will increase blood pressure, but it also strengthens the heart, leading to cardiac hypertrophy, which is a very serious risk of cardiovascular problems. Now, if you're taking stimulants, when your heart receptors are more responsive, then you increase hypertrophy of the heart even more, because it will contract even harder, it will beat even faster, and it's just like training a muscle harder. So now you have cardiovascular hypertrophy of the left ventricle, and that is a serious potential problem, because people will think, well, if my heart's getting stronger, it's a good thing. Not every time, because if you make the wall of the heart thicker, then it's harder to expand. It's like if your muscle is always super hard, it's hard to stretch that muscle. Same thing with the heart. It needs to expand and contract to push the blood out. But if that wall is super thick, it's very hard to expand, which means that it's less capable of doing its function, which is to pump blood. It means that even at rest, it will need to beat faster, because if it cannot expand a lot, it cannot send as much blood. So you need to go faster and faster and faster. And the heart, just like anything, the more you use it, the faster it tires out. So if the heart is beating at 100 beats per minute year round, then it will lead to more long-term use and fatigue than if it beats at 60.
When we have these young guys that are like getting heart attacks, and it's on the internet and stuff, it's like, yeah, you combine that with rave culture. You got fucking nice bod. You can go to a rave, pop fucking 10 pills of MDMA, and they're like, well, the steroids did it. It's like, listen, yeah, probably, but also just being a dumb fuck.
Yeah.
No, let's throw in, increased hematocrit levels. Let's, higher RBC, unchecked blood, and you throw that in the mix, and also you're adding another stressor. It's and I think that stimulant thing is a bit, and I've seen you talk about that before, Chris, and I think that's something probably that definitely gets, we won't even get into there's a pretty big opioid issue as well within the bodybuilding community as well. So, we're adding that as well. But I think because opioids at least are not talked about as a positive, stimulants are a part of a protocol. And you're just increasing risk on top of risk, which you don't need to. God forbid you actually learn how to diet properly.
Or train.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest issues is people want to always pinpoint steroids. It's a low-hanging fruit to say, yeah, this guy had health problems because of steroids. It's like, what is the totality of his behavior and all the other things that he's doing or not doing, and just some of these other bad health behaviors? Is he taking painkillers? Does he drink? What are all these other things that this person is doing? Like, look at Rich Piana. Like, you think the only reason why he died was because of the steroids? I mean, sure, it had a role in his issues, but and it's scary, because it's one of the things that has made me so passionate about learning more about this stuff, is that the misuse, the misinformation, the just blatant blindness of just using these drugs is scary, man. Like, you talk to guys and you're like, when was the last time you got blood work done? And they've been on steroids for a number of years. Like, I've never got it done. I don't want to see. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and like, when was the last time you checked your blood pressure? Oh, I don't know, like a year ago. I'm like, what? Like, how can we be so just innocuous to this stuff? It's scary, man. And I think that's why there needs to be more conversations about this stuff with guys like us. I mean, I'm by no means an expert, but I know more than what most people know. And we need to help, man, because so many guys are using these things. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that use them very successfully and have great health outcomes. And when they're used responsibly, like any other substance, you're going to be fine, most likely, right? But it's just, people don't know what they don't know, and they don't look at any data when they're using these drugs. And it's just scary, man. But I'm glad we're talking about this, because it needs to be said.
But the cofactors is the thing no one talks about. Like, the smart people kind of talk about it, but everyone else is, like you said, they just pinpoint steroids. It's like, well, it's just like with nutrition protocols and stuff. It's like the cofactors is like, usually the people that want to jump on this diet want to do all these other things. Same thing with people who want to jump on steroids. They want to look jacked. People that want to look jacked, generally, like, they would do a lot of things to look jacked. some good, some bad, a lot bad, and like so you know
Right.
what I mean.
There's the behavioral aspect in that, right?
population
Who
level
is
things.
attracted to these things? It's
Yeah.
probably people with more extreme personalities. I mean,
Wanna be
you know,
on steroids.
myself, like I was a, you know, drug addict, alcoholic, street fighting, crazy fuck before I got into working out. Like training, it's in and of itself was the real rescue there. But then seeing that and being like, okay, like, hey, you know, and I just started out having, because I went to a TRT clinic, because, you know, after you got hit in the head with a baseball bat a couple of times, shit doesn't line up so well. And so like I was like, oh wow, I'm 30 years old with, you know, the 82-year-old testosterone levels. Maybe this would be helpful. And I saw that it improved so many aspects of my life, my mental health, it improved my physical health. I actually became a healthier person through utilizing this stuff. And so I think, you know, again, there's a net positive there, but that same attraction, if my life had not gone in a direction it did, it would have just been down that road of just making me a worse person. You know, it just amplifies things.
Yeah.
I don't know, Chris, do you see anything population-wise, cofactor-wise? Like, I know you've been around.
Well, the worst thing I've seen, and we talked about this earlier, I mean, I've seen tons of bodybuilders, for example, using speed to do their cardio in the morning. So when you need to take amphetamines just to be able to do cardio, I mean, that's shit. I mean, but one thing I want to talk about is, again, the mental aspect. Because that's something that is not talked about. There's actually real dangers of addiction to using anabolic steroids because several reasons. First, it increases, many steroids actually have a direct effect on the dopamine receptors. Which are the pleasure neurotransmitters. I mean, for example, when someone gets addicted to smoking and it's hard to stop, it's because nicotine activates the dopamine receptors, giving you a pleasure response. When you stop smoking, you have this withdrawal effect because you need that dopamine response to feel good. Well, steroids actually have a very similar effect. So that's why sometimes it's hard for people to take some time off or to decrease the dosages. It will also increase serotonin level, which also makes you feel good. But here lies the danger. And recent studies have shown that once you stop the use of steroids, while you're on, dopamine and serotonin activity is high. So it actually makes you feel better at dealing with stress. However, when you stop, the activity, the dopamine activity and the serotonin activity are completely not shut down, but very, very low, which can lead to depression, can lead to feeling like shit. And here's the thing, the duration where these neurotransmitters are less effective post-cycle, it can be as long as 5 times the duration of the cycle. So that's why it's actually hard to stop. First, sure, you love to be jacked, it's obvious, but it actually makes you feel like less of a human being when you're not on. And that's where I think that coaches need to be able to deal with competitive bodybuilders. If you want to compete in bodybuilding and in many strength sport and in sports, you will need to take steroids. I mean, you won't be a powerlifting champion or a strongman competitor champion if you don't take steroids. But coaches need to prepare the aftermath. Just like when we're dealing with bodybuilders or figure competitors, we need to prepare them for the post-competition period from a nutritional perspective, for example. How many coaches, when the competition is over, they actually stop dealing with their athlete?
Unless you pay
come
them.
back when you want to prepare again for a contest. But that's where all the bad things happen. And it's the same thing with drugs. I mean, unless you plan to stay on forever, which in my opinion is a big mistake, unless it's TRT, which is fine, well, you need to prepare the aftermath. And how you handle the last few weeks of a cycle, for example, can do wonders to minimize the loss of muscle mass, but also making you feel better. And not as shitty when you stop. And people don't understand why you're losing muscle after a cycle, for example. They think it's because your testosterone level is shut down. That's like a minor part of the equation. You can actually build muscle with zero testosterone. It's harder, but you can. So certainly inhibiting testosterone will not guarantee muscle loss. It will make it harder to build muscle, but it should not make you lose muscle. The only thing that can make you lose muscle is an increase in cortisol, which will break down muscle tissue. And here's what happened when you're in a cycle, okay, at the cellular level. Androgens, steroids, will use a second messenger to go from the receptor to the nucleus of your muscle cell, okay? Basically, you need, the second messenger is like the bus that transmit the message from the hormone to the nucleus of the cell. Now, the glucocorticoid receptors that deal with cortisol and the androgen receptors that deal with steroids use the same bus, the same second messenger. So if you overload the body with 20 times the amount of normal androgens, it uses up all of the buses. So cortisol cannot do its job properly. The body needs cortisol to function. So what it does, it will increase the production of cortisol to compensate. So, but still, the androgen will still way overpower cortisol, right? So the body can use a second strategy. It will increase the responsiveness, the sensitivity of the cortisol receptors, glucocorticoid receptors, just to try to even the field out. Normally during a cycle, that's where gains stop. Because now, because of the upregulation of the cortisol receptors, cortisol and androgen activity is kind of balanced. And people, what they do at that point, they often increase the dosages, which is the worst thing to do. Because the third strategy the body can use is increase the number of cortisol receptors. And when that happens, you are permanently fucked. Okay, people think that when you use steroids, you have a lifetime advantage over natural lifters, even when you stop taking steroids. It might be true because you start from a higher muscle mass standpoint if you build more muscle while being on. But once you go off, if you've been on for a long time and you didn't use a smart strategy, like you used too much drug, higher dosages, too long, you are actually left with more cortisol receptors than a normal person. So in a sense, you actually will respond less to training than a natural lifter will because of that adaptation. You can stop producing cortisol or reduce the production. You can, like the receptors might become less sensitive over time, but the new receptors you produce as an adaptive mechanism will still stick with you. And that's what makes you lose muscle.
Is that kind of, so that's kind of where these lifestyle things come in that matter no matter what, but it's like things that raise cortisol, like cold stress. Yeah. But Jeremy mentioned, like, I got more sleep. I got my life under control. I got a good schedule. You know what I mean? I got a dog. Dogs help. Yeah. But on the other end, when you're off and these receptors are high, there's a lot of people's lives that go into the fucking gutter, because they're almost receiving twice the impact from just normal stress, we'll call it, and then they lose their job, and that affects them 10 times more than it would affect me.
You know, that happened to me 2 years ago. This is a pretty interesting story. Is I literally thought I was on. Like, I thought I was on. I thought I was doing TRT, and I got bad stuff. Severely underdosed. For a year. Severely underdosed, right? For like a year. And you know, I was still making decent progress in the gym. You know, like you mentioned, can you put on muscle, you know, with low testosterone? Yeah, sure. But you know, in the back of my mind, I was like, man, I'm nailing pretty much everything, and I'm not really progressing the way that I think. Plus, my sex drive is shit. Plus, I'm feeling really anxious all the time. But I'm like, you know, it can't be having anything to do with my testosterone. Like, I'm taking testosterone. And so, you know, that's when I had a lot of anxiety symptoms come on, like real bad. And it makes
a lot during then.
Yeah, like it makes a lot of sense based on what you just said, Chris. You know, and I was so sensitive and to all these neurotransmitters and stuff. It just, you know, then I get
tell them your level. It was like fucking like.
It was like 108. Like, it was crazy low. It was crazy low. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, how can this be possible, right? Like, it's like I'd come off, didn't PCT, didn't do anything, right? And I had no idea. So that, you know, I guess that's one of the dangers of you know, getting underground stuff, is it's severely underdosed a lot of times. You know, and I should have done blood work before that point, but I was kind of like, oh, whatever, I'm just cruising on a low
But it
dose.
also forced you to change your lifestyle a little bit. Like, weirdly.
It did. It was a blessing, because also then it led me to get involved with a lot more education on performance enhancing drugs, to realize what I was doing, and it led me down a road that helped me and invariably helped a lot of people that I work with. But yeah, like you said, I mean, I had to really check my habits and check my stress management strategies. But it's crazy because I thought I was on, right? Like I could imagine, you know, this stuff happens all the time. I think that's one of the biggest concerns always with using
You saw
underground
gains
labs
though.
is,
This is the crazy thing, and like we've had Ben House
Yeah.
on here, and we didn't talk about this, but like in his like one of his main study presentations, like listen here, they knocked out fucking tests essentially at the brain.
Yeah.
These dudes still gained, I want to say like 2 or 3%. I can't remember correctly.
Yeah.
Obviously, the people that didn't get it knocked out gained more, but he's like, it's not the fucking.
Yeah, I still like
testosterone.
my training was going good,
Dude.
Like,
there was Greg Knuckles pulled us a meta-analysis, I believe, that showed they interviewed or tested a lot of pro football players, guys who are natural, you know, amateur and pro football players who have a high FFMI, are strong as shit. And you think about just the amount, I mean, all of us here probably have had multiple brain injuries of some sort. So we're going to naturally have some kind of lower testosterone, but even at natural levels also had a genetic ability to still build muscle. And you see that in a lot of football players. These guys are, you know, have low testosterone due to TBI or whatever kind of interruption of the HPTA axis, but they still are big, muscular, strong dudes. So, you know, there is a correlation obviously towards exogenous use, but it's not like Chris said, it's not the end all be all.
Well, and so maybe we should just, I didn't watch your hour and 10 minutes. I didn't watch all the video, but, and I read, and funny thing in your article reviewing it, you're like, listen, your conclusion was basically like, watch the video. I was like, fuck you, Chris. But so, which is great YouTube strategy, by the way. Push them to the YouTube page. I got it. But are the like, so let's say someone finds himself in this situation, blah, 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 cortisol, more buses, like now you're fucked. Yeah. What are some strategies? Because inevitably people are going to feel like this anyway. So what are just, I guess, some main stuff that maybe you guys would use?
Don't come off.
Yeah.
One HRT. Yeah.
I think it's also smarter. Like if you can avoid that situation in the first place, know what to look for. So for example, you can't like stay on forever if you want to prevent that from happening. I mean, an approach I really liked that was promoted by Brian Batchelder several years ago. Like Brian Batchelder worked with, in the UK, they're weightlifters, they're powerlifters, they're strongmen and athletes, and he would use 2 to 3 weeks cycle. So 2 or 3 weeks with short acting on, 2 weeks off. And you could go on almost forever like that, which is basically a never ending cycle, but you are off half the cycle. And you actually tailor the training. You would do more volume on weeks and stuff like that. You could take supplement to lower cortisol on the off weeks. The logic is that in 2 weeks, regardless of the doses, you can't have that bad stuff happen. I mean, you won't lead to increase in cortisol sensitivity or increase in cortical receptors in 2 weeks. You actually won't have much testosterone production inhibition in 2 or 3 weeks. You won't have those overstimulation of the dopamine receptors and serotonin receptors that lead to a rebound effect in 2 weeks. So you don't get the addiction, you don't get the inhibition effect, you don't get the cortisol response, you don't get the serious blood pressure increase, you don't get the kidney problems. So if someone was smart and you can start from scratch and you need to use steroids or you want to, that's the approach I would recommend. However, if someone has been on for a while, it's kind of hard to go to that approach because you need to fix things up first. But normally what you want is when you go off cycle, for example, of course, if you like build new receptors, there's really nothing you can do to take them off. So what you need to do is to try to minimize cortisol levels as soon as you stop. And that starts with the last week or last 2 weeks of a cycle. The problem that most people have is when they're on, let's say that you know that next week you will be off for 8 weeks, for example, okay? What will you do with your last week on? You will train like a madman. You know, that's my last week. I need to make the most out of it. But that's actually the biggest problem because that will upregulate cortisol production. That will increase muscle damage. That will magnify the potential problems. So actually you should start your post-cycle period the last week or last 2 weeks you were on, meaning that you should train as if you are not on anymore, which means less frequency, which means a lot less volume. When someone is off, what I recommend for a training strategy would be low volume, but extremely high intensiveness. Like going to failure, going beyond failure, like one all-out set per exercise, but then like drop set, super set, whatever. You can do whatever you want in that one set, but super low volume. I actually like 3 days a week, whole body training, minimalistic approach, or 4 days a week, or one day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off, upper lower. That works well also.
So is that a concern or a similar strategy if you're going to be back on HRT? Like, do you have to be as concerned about that?
To me, if HRT brings you only to normal levels, I would still use that approach.
Well, and I think that's not a terrible idea just from periodization in general, is to be able to mix up these low volume and high volume sessions.
Go high volume when you're on, go low volume, high intense. I don't believe you should go high volume and high intensiveness at the same time.
Right. Well, I want to circle back to that first part about like two on, two off. You know, it's interesting because, and I'm not, Broderick Chavez talks a lot about how periodization, as we see it, as developed by mainly powerlifters and weightlifters in the United States, really we took from Eastern European block periodization, which was this 3 weeks of building intensity and a 1 week deload. But that was it had nothing to do with the physiology. It had to do with the fact that that's exactly how they were cycling their drugs. They were loading up for 3 weeks, taking a week off completely, and using short acting things like, D-ball, whatever it was that they were, T-ball, whatever in the Eastern Bloc. And then they would take that deload week off and then escalate again and drop off. And then they would walk into competition. So it's interesting that full circle idea is like, hey, it's also from a health perspective as well.
That's actually what
I've heard John Meadows talk about that too. John Meadows on his membership site, if you watch some of the videos about things he's tried, like for example, he talks about that with Anadrol, going 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and kind of during your cycle, you only have, it's 3 months, but you only have 6 weeks on total. And he said, when he would get his liver enzymes and everything checked after, like everything cleared pretty well, and he always felt pretty good. What I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about is like, do you feel like there's a point when you're on during, a cycle where gains start to slow down and some of the side effects start to catch up? And is it smarter to maybe run a little more aggressively for 3 to 6 weeks and then just come back off? Like, I think we kind of touched on that, but I've experimented with that a little bit, and I tend to feel like you get the sweet spot where you get some gains, everything feels good, and then all of a sudden, like for me, what I've been monitoring is blood pressure and heart rate as kind of these stress indicators. And I noticed everything was rolling. I still feel fine, but then all of a sudden my blood pressure started to jump up and my resting heart rate started to come up, even though I'm doing my cardio and eating well. And to me, that was like, okay, it's been good, but let's leave it there and then just, kind of take it from there. But is that kind of the best indicators, aside from some of the obvious other side effect feelings, of when to stop a cycle? And that could be different depending on the compound or who you are.
If someone is not competing, that's how I would work. I mean, because there's no sense in like continue using drugs and even increasing drugs if you're not going to gain from them.
Right.
So it's much smarter to just stop and try to maintain what you've gained, restart the body. Anyway, the longer you stay on, the more drawbacks you're going to have when you stay off. I mean, that's something you need to understand. And of course, and because of what I mentioned earlier, like both the psychological and the mental addiction, it's different. Or the neurological and the psychological addiction, it's hard to have the discipline to say, okay, I'm not gaining anymore. I'm going to stop for a few weeks, then I'm going to ramp back up. Very few people have the mental discipline to do that, but it's likely the best way to do it. If you want to have long-term health and progression. I mean, how many bodybuilders do we know that will use 3 grams, yet they don't gain an ounce of muscle? I mean, what's you're just burning money.
It's just
well, I think to Chris's point, what is the purpose of what you're doing? I'm 42 years old. I'm not looking to compete in anything. My theory behind any kind of use is I want this kind of low-level background effect. I mean, for me, most of the time, what I would call like sport TRT, which is about 3 milligrams or 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per week, is kind of a great spot because it's just creating a low level systemic effect, allowing me to recover a little bit better, giving me moderate gains, but it's again a short term. But if I'm 12 weeks of that, maybe ramping up to higher dosage if I am looking to put on muscle, but not to anything that's this kind of, like you said, like 3 grams a week, or even pushing like 2 grams a week, which is not uncommon. It just seems like that's really, really overloading the system for not much.
Well, I was saying the negative
benefit.
We talked about this super higher physiological levels. It's almost like I think Jeremy talked about doctors prescribing testosterone too low, but if you have more buses and there's more cortisol, it's almost a worse effect than if you were just to be never have done it in the past. So it's almost like you have to do enough to be kind of caught up to the cortisol so that you now feel normal. So you kind of, you can fuck yourself long-term, like you said, and maybe that's where the recreational use, you almost need to be there if you've done it a long time, because otherwise you lose all the adaptations and then life fucks you even more.
Well, and people are stupid. They judge things based on side effects, not on effect. They're like, am I, I gained 30 pounds of muscle. No, you didn't, you dumbass. You gained 28 pounds of water. And they came off, they're like, I lost it all. No, you didn't. It was doing exactly what
that easy.
You have the opportunity to gain more muscle because you have increased leverages, you have increased water retention, you're in a anabolic and androgenic state. Like, it's not, and again, if we don't know the purpose behind what you're doing, like if someone, look at these guys, over in what's Dubai, where like they're big into like the DECA only cycles and like just loading up, and they're fucking monsters.
They're all huge.
Huge.
I mean,
but they're
I think
also watery in as hell.
They are. I mean, I think still, we've talked about the drugs and some of the things, but I mean, ultimately we all know that it still comes back to the big rocks. Is like, if you need to take more than 500-600 milligrams of testosterone to get results, your program sucks, your diet sucks, your recovery strategies suck. Like, you shouldn't need that much gear. I mean, obviously if you're a really big guy and you've been doing it for a long time, but just to, put on 10 pounds of muscle in a 12-week cycle, like, you shouldn't need that much. If you need that much, the mechanics of how you're taking the drugs, the mixtures of drugs, and all those other things, they're just not right.
I think there is, though, an escalation effect that has to happen over time. Because if you're gaining body weight, you're going to need more of the same substance. And when you've used something over and over again, you at a higher body weight, you're going to need more of it. But again, it's like, it's also the thing that, like, testosterone is kind of the king. Like, for me, I don't feel good on over like 200 milligrams of testosterone. I feel like garbage. And everyone will tell you like, hey, do this or do that. And I don't like it. I like TRT levels. Now there's other stuff I might add in for specific effect. But for me, again, at 42 years old, like, higher body weight, higher water retention, higher, acne. I'm 42.
My point of view here is that, testosterone, those who abuse testosterone and use like large dosage normally do it because of a financial reason. They want to use bigger dosages, and it's less expensive than the more exotic drugs, and it's easier to find most of the time. In reality, I feel that testosterone in a cycle, its role is to maintain normal testosterone function, meaning that if you take steroids, you will inhibit your natural testosterone production. Now, steroids will actually compensate for that at the muscle level and at the neurological level, but not several other characteristics that testosterone brings you, like sex drive and stuff like that. So to me, you should base a cycle on the anabolic products, maybe like depending on what you want to accomplish. Could be equipoise, could be primo, could be deca, whatever. And you maintain a small amount of testosterone just to feel good. You don't use testosterone to gain on a cycle. You use testosterone to feel good on a cycle because the other products will kill your natural testosterone production.
And I think also the estrogen production as well, making sure that your estrogen levels are
absolutely.
Do you guys feel like, I feel like from an outside perspective, with a lot of these just crazy doses that people are taking and coaches recommend, I think it's a Band-Aid, like it's a Band-Aid for just poorly organized programming
or life.
And how exactly you don't manage your stress, your diet shit. And it's just like, if you just do more drugs to a certain point, you'll make some progress, but then you won't. And then
that's the one thing Christian alluded to in the thing was like, Natty versus unnatural or whatever. Anyways,
Yeah.
is that you lose those lessons sometimes when you start going
100%.
unnatural, because the natural life lessons of training and stress and stuff,
You got to be on
feel it when
point.
you're unnatural. So they're almost at a better spot where it's a band-aid, like you said, for a lot of things, and you don't get that life lesson because you can basically out-drug that until you can't,
100%.
and then you're fucking dead. And so but that's the reality, or you have fucking depression or whatever, all the other bullshit they talk about. But you're too late. So you miss
and just enjoying training for training's sake, right?
Yeah.
Look, actually, Christian, I wanted to ask you, because there's an article you wrote a while back, I think it was on T Nation, talking about like it was that Natty kind of versus enhanced thing, but you're talking about protein expression and how technically an enhanced lifter probably get away with less protein because the 24-hour muscle protein synthesis kind of cycle versus being more catabolic in a natural state. But what about the nitrogen expression, about the nitrogen retention ability of steroids?
I believe that an enhanced lifter should use more protein.
Okay.
Because you have a better capacity to take that protein and build muscle from it. What I meant in that article is that you could actually, an enhanced lifter could actually gain on fewer so there is less risk of losing muscle.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So it's more like it protects you against being an asshole with your diet.
Yeah.
So now, would you state then that, like, okay, so our normal,
Oreos.
capacity is that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is kind of the simple thing. So in an enhanced lifter, potentially because of that expression, we could utilize above that level and see better.
Normally, what I would do, and I don't work with enhanced lifters anymore. I used to work with bodybuilders. And with bodybuilders, I would actually recommend 1.5, 1.75 gram per pound. With natural lifters, I would use 1 to 1.25 because they can use more protein to build the muscle. So it makes sense to take advantage of that. Because if you don't give the body that much more protein, you're losing most of the benefit of steroid, which is increasing protein synthesis.
Which we see, I think, in that bodybuilding world, is we see what we see as insane amounts of protein. People are like, well, why are they doing that? Because the thermic effect, they're kind of burning more, but they're utilizing that protein.
And it trickles down to natural diet tendencies, and we get a lot of these. And that's kind of like with Ben House, they'll kind of go through the actual research talking about normal populations, which there's no studies on how much protein can we utilize and blah, 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 in like a population level amongst these meatheads or bodybuilders. And so it's interesting because we're never going to get that study for a while.
What do you guys, I've often thought about this, like this is me and it's a preference thing, but I feel like when let's say you're on a cycle that's meant to put on mass, you're massing, and obviously you need to have a pretty hypercaloric environment to put on a lot of tissue. Now, we know that when you eat a lot of protein, and let's say you're eating a lot of red meats and things that are just, harder to chew, they're just, like obviously protein makes you feel fuller and you're really trying to push calories, where there's some people that'll say, yes, you can utilize more amino acids when you're on and all this stuff, but if it's interrupting the ability to put on, like, eat more food. Like, I have trouble eating a ton of protein. Like, obviously I can eat a ton of carbs. For me, that works. And I felt like when I was overly focused on getting enough protein, sometimes I wasn't getting as many total calories as I needed. Do you guys feel like, in that scenario, just when you're trying to push food, does it make more sense, to eat and more be focused on the total amount of calories than to being overly obsessed about getting X amount of protein in? Yeah. Because let's say you hit your protein, but you're just not hypercaloric enough because you can't consume enough total amount of food.
One thing I found, and there was a few studies by a French scientist showing that you can actually absorb and create an anabolic effect from ingesting 80% of your protein in one sitting. And that's not what I recommend, but what I mean is if eating protein like decreases your appetite, you could actually move a large portion of your daily protein intake at the end of the day, when most of your calories have been already ingested. because you will be able to use that protein to build muscle. So I certainly would have protein around the workout, like post-workout, for example, because you want to start the recovery process. But in the 24-hour period, it probably doesn't really matter where you're taking that protein, provided that you reach those numbers. So for you, if eating lots of solid protein during the day kills your appetite, you might actually use, let's say, 75, 100 grams of those protein in 2 shakes in the evening. Which would not interfere with your.
I do it in the morning.
The other thing is this is where I would actually. I'm usually kind of a low fat, higher carb guy, but this is where I would actually drive higher fat content. So, like, let's say you're having trouble consuming calories, we'll eat 80-20 ground beef instead of 93-7, and you're adding a lot of calories while still keeping protein. So if you're eating a pound of that, maybe it's instead of 95 grams of protein, you're getting 85, but you're also getting an extra 500 calories of fat. Like,
right.
Well, this is the panel for it. We're all the dudes that if we stop lifting, we get small. So like logistically, food's an issue, which we got lots of tips for that. But it's like if you eat, we'll call it whole foods or clean or whatever the fuck all these people want to call it. If you eat that for like 1,500 calories, you can pretty much hit your macros. You're good. Like especially if you have muscle, you can regulate glucose. Like you can eat like shit. Should you? Like it's probably not helpful. Just like getting huge is not helpful over time. Like Chris is saying, you're 300 pounds, you're still fucking 300 pounds. But my BMI, it doesn't match because my muscle, you're still 300 pounds, your heart's working, blah, 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 blah. So I think like logistically, more food is probably better. And like Chris was saying, you can regulate your protein more as long as you hit those periods throughout the day to utilize them. But that's just a normal hard, quote unquote, hard gainer problem. Like, eat your macros, eat vegetables. But if you get to the point where you're too full, don't eat any more vegetables, eat less and eat pizza.
And let's look at the guys who are really successful with this, pro bodybuilders, right? What do their meals look like? Cream of rice and a protein shake before workout. EAAs and sugar during a workout. Cream of rice and protein powder after workout, and then a bunch of chicken and rice. So and it's juice. Like they're yes, they're driving a lot of carbohydrates in there, but off season, I think most of these guys are going to load up on fats a lot more. They're going to eat 100, 120 grams of fat. Whereas, when we're talking about prep, they're eating 30, 40 grams of fat. So it's a big swing.
What you said makes so much sense to, swap. Like, why eat chicken? It's so low in fat compared to eating ground beef or a steak or something like that.
Eat a bowl of pasta bolognese. Right? You're getting a bunch of ground beef. You get a ton of carbs out of the pasta.
A big one, like Jeb and I are really passionate about this. Ramen noodles, and then mix your protein in, like because it's cheap, and then just drink pop or orange juice.
Buddy.
You know what the problem is though, Jeremy? That the real issue is we don't want it bad enough. I'll straight up say that. Like the pro bodybuilders,
I totally agree.
Like they mentally want it more. They'll eat their fucking chicken and rice.
We had our friend Ethan Ethan Grossman, and like we told him we need him to turn his phone sideways. He's gotten so big he wouldn't fit in the picture when he was holding it up and down.
And like
he wants it, man. He just he just crushes, and it's a miserable fucking existence for me to just get to 215.
Yeah, we don't want that
300.
Well, the real answer is to eat protein, whole protein, and eat your vegetables and eat your rice and figure out a way.
Well, eat things like eggs that are easy to get down. And so, I mean, that's really in the last 2 months where I had to check myself and say, you're being a little bitch. Like you don't really want it this bad if you're saying, oh, I can't eat enough food.
Man,
like
you really don't want to be 300 pounds. You don't want it.
Do you remember Greg Kovacs?
Yeah.
Greg would actually blend, put in a blender his solid meal so that he could actually eat them because his muscle was all torn up from eating too much.
Derek Poundstone has a video of him making chicken breast smoothies. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life.
Like they want it. Like Jeremy, to be honest, like this is actually good because this is advanced conversation is like you want to be 230 even though you want to be 270 like realistically you're going to be 230.
No, I want to to be 230. Because my frame, I mean, come on.
Like even if you wanted to be 300 you would have to like literally like Ethan's a good example. His training programs, I think it was periodized at like a 5-year to 10-year plan.
I mean, no, I think that's 10 pounds a year is a pretty acceptable goal, I think, like.
And I would say that to most people who look at this stuff.
I was listening to Nick Walker on what's it, Fowled? I can't say his name.
Yeah, I love
Toronto. Yeah, so I was listening to him on, which is a great podcast, by the way. But Nick Walker was on there, and they're like, okay, like, what was your most successful off season? He's like, well, I competed at like 230, and then went up to 300 for the off season, and then or whatever, and he came back, maybe it was 260, and he's like, and I dieted back down. I was 268, so I put on 8 pounds of muscle that year for 70 pounds of weight gain.
Yeah, it's like, holy,
that was his most successful ever.
The
Like,
amount
can you
of food.
imagine?
Yeah,
That's not a good trade-off.
No, it's not. I mean, that's
Like, you gotta get rid of Leah. Like, you gotta get rid of the dog. You probably gotta stop training people. You gotta do.
Your asshole is just your asshole's gonna hurt for a year.
You need to make money, so they have OnlyFans
shitting
now.
Constantly.
It's easy to make money online now. So like,
that's true. That's true.
Like, you're gonna probably.
My gym's small now, though. My gym's small now, so I don't have to walk around that much.
Well,
so
OnlyFans.
Sit on the couch half the time. I just sit in my chair and I just yell at people.
If you want to, if we had like bodybuilders who've been around for a while, like I'm sure we would have some webcam stories and stuff. Like, you need to make money, you need to eat more, train more. Like, you don't want it bad enough. I would say most people who read Teenage and stuff, like, they want to get jacked and all that stuff. You don't got it.
No,
you can be a little jacked, but just not like you're not going to be too.
I have two examples to illustrate that point. Two pro bodybuilders I've trained. One is a guy who won the Canadian Nationals 4 times, but he always won at like 176 pounds. And his diet during the off season was more strict than most people's pre-competition diet. I mean, the guy went on vacation in Mexico, and he would follow his strict diet while on vacation in Mexico. That's how strict the guy was. He was in my office, and in his plan, it called for 1 scoop of protein. So he took a scoop of protein, and it was a little extra, and he just squinted with his credit card. I mean, that's how anal he was about things. And he actually would gain like 1 or 2 pounds a year. And when he decided to turn pro, Aceto was doing his diet. Okay, so then he started actually having like pancakes every morning with maple syrup and stuff like that. And he went up to 240 off season and competed at 210 and finished third in his first pro show behind Doug Dale, which I also work with, and David Henry. So to progress, he actually had to go slightly dirty. Same thing with Daryl G, which I helped. I trained for the Olympia when he competed at a 202. Right up to 6-week pre-contest, he would have 1 fast food meal every day. It was called Juniors, like 3 or 4 burgers. And he was like super lean. At his size, he actually needed that. And the guy had the smallest appetite ever. He actually completely messed up his Olympia peaking just because he didn't want to eat what I was giving him. I actually didn't make the trip. I was in Colorado with my wife, so I sent one of my guys with him, and I sent the peaking plan, and he called me up. Dude, he doesn't want to eat. So what do you mean he doesn't want to eat the rice you had on the sheet? Well, what does he want to eat? He's not hungry. Dude, it's a fucking Olympia. I mean, carb.
You have to.
Anyway, so he didn't have much of an appetite, so he needed to have that 1 fast food meal. Same thing with the guy I trained for nationals. He finished second in the super heavyweight. Same thing. He needed to keep 1 fast food meal during his off season. Otherwise, his body weight would go down and he wouldn't progress.
Yeah.
What I heard Branch Warren say like recently, that he would actually eat a pizza and some ice cream every Sunday during prep and never told anyone.
So Mike Menzer would have ice cream every day when preparing for a contest.
Yeah. Really?
Ronnie just needed to have some vodka.
You're right.
Yeah, apparently,
He was like, it was the vodka.
Sauce. You should see how much barbecue sauce that motherfucker put on every meal.
Yeah.
But you know what I thought would be one thing that would be interesting to cover too, and I know, Christian, like, you've written about this a lot, but just, the thoughts on, obviously, natural versus non-natural training and the amounts of volume that people are doing. And we know that when you go to any commercial gym, you see the amount of sets that people are doing, and their relative effort is just so low.
Pointless.
Right? It's just like, I feel like, when I look at a gym and if someone were to ask me, like, what is the biggest problem? What is the biggest thing that's holding people back, even the intermediate to advanced graduation? It's that their effort and execution and focus on their sets is just so poor, and they're doing so much junk volume that it's just a waste. All you're doing is expending energy with like really no.
That's why they start using
benefit in
steroids in the
adaptation.
first place.
Right. Because they're like, oh,
Instead of using them because they want to go the extra mile, is that they actually are not getting results because they're not training hard enough. And training hard is not training a lot. Training hard is training hard. I mean, to me, I know when someone is training hard if I'm only watching one of their sets. I only look at one set. You have that one set to impress me. That's how I judge how hard you train. There's a difference between training hard and training a lot. And what I see the problem with most people is they are actually, they love training more than they love gaining. Yeah. They are addicted to the training. They like feeling like they're doing lots of sets. They like the feeling of being in the gym and pumping up, looking at themselves in the mirror. And they don't care if they're not gaining. At least they don't care enough to try to train the right way. Yeah.
If it was me, I'd prefer to do 5 hard sets and leave. Yeah. Like 5 hard sets that fucked me up. Yeah. Drop sets, rest, pause. I respond way better to that. Like if I train longer than that, the quality just starts to go down. And really, I always think like if you can do more than like 8 really balls to the wall sets in a workout, you're probably not trying hard enough. Like you're just not trying.
Of course, for strength is different because strength is neurological, so there's a motor learning component. But for size, 100%. In my opinion, most people just don't train hard enough, and at one point you can't compensate by doing more volume. You just can't. So
well, the big problem comes in though is steroids work, and they work regardless.
Correct.
So, you know, we've seen research that without training, people have put on, I think it was like 10 kilos of muscle.
Yeah,
you know,
I read that recently.
So when you take someone who is doing a lot of, you know, what they would call high volume or whatever training, because they watched a video with Jay Cutler do 30 sets, like, yeah, like he did, but you're not Jay Cutler.
He's Jay Cutler,
right. And you say, oh, well, that works. And you know, we have the volume studies and again,
everything
the volume studies really. I think are mediocre in really accounting for intensity within the set. And I mean, I never had more fun working out than doing like dog crap. Like I fucking love that style of training. Yeah. It sucks and I throw up and I feel terrible, but like Dean knows, like when I go in the gym, like I don't want to be there a long time. I want to go in and do 2 sets, you know, like I really like, you know, a lot of the guys I follow now, like I really like Jordan Peters' approach, Matt Jansen, who's training that Nick Walker kid. Like I like this idea of having 2 or 3 exercises per body part, like 2 hard sets, one, you know, more in that 6 to 10 range, one more in that like anywhere from 10 to 20 range, hitting all the rep ranges you can, and high intensity or drop sets, you know, when you've kind of, instead of increasing sets that day, you could increase your, you know, by doing a drop set or an intensity technique. Like I love that kind of training and everyone kind of has gotten away from it, which whatever, that's fine. But I agree, it's fun.
You know, it's a lot of fun. Jordan Peters actually went to volume for a while and he got weaker and flatter. And
yeah.
But that goes to like doing kind of, I think like when I say, you truly don't want to be 270, I think like, and even Chris, you mentioned it, like people like getting pumped and stuff. Like that's cool too. It's just like this picture of what you want in your mind. Like you probably can't do that. And that's probably why you like the training that you like. It's just like, I'll probably never be huge because I like doing
progress
deadlifts,
though.
But I'm going to look like a deadlifter. True. I'm never going to look that way. I'm a pussy.
But I like progress too. I never really thought of it that way until Christian said it. But like, I'm more obsessed with getting huge and getting progress than I am with actually training. Like, I really like training, but I really like getting big. That's what
I also really like making money. And if I'm all in the gym for 3 hours a day, 6 times a week, I'm not making money.
No, there's no way.
That's that whole lifestyle thing. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize what they like to do, and they think that they want to do this thing. It's just like, well, no.
Well, there's also the thing that I think is awesome and like the way I want to look. And then when I start getting closer to that, my wife goes, "You look fucking disgusting." And I don't like the way you look. And I go, okay, like what's really going to be important long term here? Right.
Yeah.
Me impressing a
wants to
bunch
be
of
golfer.
dudes in their mom's basement, looking
Yeah.
on Instagram,
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
my
that's
wife.
true. Yeah.
We're basically
Yeah.
just making fun of everyone. Okay, Chris, anything you want to leave our listeners with? I know this is probably different. I don't even know have you talked about this much on podcasts before?
What do you mean?
Like the natural versus unnatural. Like we went pretty deep
The
there.
only time I've went like on that topic a bit was when I did a podcast with Ben Pakulski.
Oh yeah, you would have told me.
Mhm.
That's the only
For
time.
sure.
But
Yeah,
not,
so-
not as deep. Well, but one thing I want to close on, it's actually not good closing words. It's just something I wanted to
As
add.
usual. Yeah, I know.
I suck at conclusions even when
And on a
I
high note.
That's why I called you out on it, because I know you hate doing this.
Well, actually, it's something I wanted to mention earlier, but you guys just kept interrupting. About the
Just keep interrupting them. Yeah.
you just go with a fatter cut of meat to increase your calories. What I really like about that approach, though, is that, and if you go with a higher fat cut of meat, when you diet down, it's much easier because you just go back to a leaner and leaner and leaner cut, and you don't even have the impression that you're cutting calories. So that's one thing I like.
Yeah.
Same thing with if you can get away with getting junk food, getting one fast food meal, or even cake if you want to, when you're trying to build muscle, while not building that much fat in the process. Once you want to get leaner, it's super easy. You just cut the crap out and you're going to get leaner. The less you have to reduce overall food intake and still get leaner, the better off you are, the less muscle you're going to build.
Yeah.
Yeah, I literally, when I started, because we were in Costa Rica, like our meals were like made up of a lot of cabbage, a lot of like beans. It was very like kind of, what you would expect to eat down there. So when I came home and I stopped all that, and then when I wanted to kind of lose again, all I did was, instead of eating 18 cups of rice a day, I threw broccoli slaw in and started putting broccoli slaw, my protein on top of that, and it was like I just started shedding weight, and it was just like such a simple fix. And then I got a little bit too light, and I was like, shit. So I threw rice back in, and it was like, my diet never felt like it changed. It was just by
Why
replacing
do you
calories.
think no one's jacked in Costa Rica?
Right.
Eat too healthy.
Yeah, and you can get drugs there.
Yeah.
You walk into the pharmacy.
They still don't.
Yeah.
Can't afford it though. No one can afford them though.
Well, it's again, we talk about cost effectiveness of calories, right? Like we all are like into like building muscle and stuff, and we talk about this with Ben House a lot. Biologically and evolutionarily speaking, this is the dumbest. Like the cost of food alone to gain 1 pound of muscle is
Chris
stupid.
said it, like you're golfing, swinging, like evolutionarily, the people who could fucking sling and rotate fucking were the kings of the tribes. They had the jackknecks, they threw the stones, and like you're like, I have to lose muscle to get good at that. Like evolutionarily, they're not like, how do I lose this muscle so I can kill the fucking.
And now the Dean doesn't deadlift and just does jujitsu.
What?
How many baseball pitchers are jacked? I mean,
Right.
Even quarterbacks.
They're the dudes running the world. I think Pat Davidson said it. They're the ones who like get the.
He said,
all the women.
yeah.
Like,
That's why we
quarterbacks,
give them $20 million a year, is because they're evolutionary great grandfather could throw a rock harder than anybody.
Actually,
that's where they earned it.
I think it was Chad Landers posted this thing where like they were doing an article with Tom Brady and blah 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 blah.
Oh
like,
yeah,
they're using bands and stuff, and I'm like, Tom Brady, like he's the fucking king of the tribe of all tribes. He's the fucking best NFL quarterback, arguably. Like he can do whatever he wants. And honestly, those bands and stuff, that probably is the best training. All the fitness trainers are trying to do bodybuilding and stuff. Evolutionarily, that's why Tom's making fucking 30 million. Like that's the goal. The goal should be to win. And so actually fitness trainers suck. We all actually are really bad at training people for what we're designed for. So
but
we're
now, Dean, now that you're getting into jiu-jitsu, like there's a benefit to being heavier in some aspects, but there's also like, I know when I'm over 200 pounds or I'm like 210, like I'm not nearly as effective a practitioner as I am when I'm lighter. Now I can throw my weight around, which is kind of nice and make things a little more painful. But like, as far as utilizing my body, getting my arms in places I want it to go, even just giving someone a guillotine, like it's hard the bigger your arms get to kind of sink those moves in. And it's,
you want, here's the real advice. And Chris probably has any advice, but if you can rotate and you fucking sling, like that should be what we all do as jobs. And that's why Chris trains
that's a punch.
athletes. Like that's, you actually the only one doing it right.
There you go. If with this pandemic, if we all revert back to our savage state and we have to fight for our lives, I'm coming out on top.
Yeah, out of all of us, well, maybe
I'm getting
Jeb's a
out
purple
for
belt
sure.
though. Like
Yeah.
he might choke, but maybe not. Like I don't know. We actually shouldn't end there because it's just like win. It's the people who actually win now since evolution.
More so as I always have weapons close to me.
I was gonna say I know Jeb. There's like
The
definitely
equalizer.
He use guns.
Old habits die hard.
Yeah.
You're in New York too. Like you should legitimately be scared of.
Dude, New York is New York is so much safer than most places.
Man,
it's
when
like
the zombies come,
nice.
you're fucking in a box. Like, I'm sorry.
Every movie shows that.
Yeah. Okay, this is getting out of control. Jeremy, anything? I know this is actually pretty important to you. So anything you want to leave with, and then we can.
No, I just think I'm just like super happy that we talked about it because it's been taboo. I know in the States and in some other places, our laws here in Canada, whatever it is, but it's just needs to be talked about. The prevalence. I just don't think a lot of people really realize how many guys and females, are using these drugs. And how many people are using them incorrectly. I would say like 90%. And the amount of just misinformation is just crazy. So I just think it's awesome to have people that have, like I've done it wrong and I've done it right, so I think we all have. So it's just great that we have a chance to talk about it and hopefully start to spread some more information about it. And, it's just, for me, I just want people to do these things correct and be safe and get really good results with it, with their training, whether they're on or off or whatever, natural or not. So I'm just thankful that we got a chance to talk about it. That's all.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think removing the morality and the stigma from it and allowing, it's like the same thing with mental health. Is there's a stigma around talking about mental health, so things don't get better. If there's a stigma around something, you can't actually talk about it and make sure that that things are better, because people are going to do these things regardless, right? Like it's not my morals or someone else's morals, like whatever, they're going to do it. And so there should, if we can have proper education, God forbid some actual decent research on it, things would be a lot better.
Well, I just feel obligated. Like all of us know stuff about these things. You gotta share. We gotta say something. Like if we don't, who else is? So these people need this information. It's gonna save people. Like it literally could save people a lot of health problems. Like that's how real this issue is, right? It's more than just training with too much volume or whatever. This is serious.
And again, to reiterate, this is for educational purposes only. It is this information is not a medical advice, just to cover our asses.
Chris,
Anybody drop dead in the 70s and 80s, because back then there was not such a negative stigma about steroids. It was not illegal in the state, for example. And bodybuilders, because of that, they actually talked to each other and they helped each other. Nowadays, what you have is people who are doing their own experiments, and you have people going on YouTube and know that if they go and claim crazy dosages, they're going to get the followers. But the kids watching that say, "Oh, that's what I need to do," and they're going to actually up the ante. I mean, I remember I worked with a guy. He was trained by an IFBB pro who had been coached by Chad Nichols, by Annie Rambo, by Chris Aceto. And what that bodybuilding coach did was basically combine the drug approaches he learned from each coach and gave that to his client. And the guy was completely messed up. So he came to me and I looked at his drug list, and he was taking 8 anabolics at the same time on top of GH, insulin, clenbuterol, cytomel. It was like crazy. It was at least 5 grams a week, and the guy was preparing for a local show.
Stupid.
Wow.
The guy was a police officer in Quebec. Police officer makes a lot of money. It's a very good salary, and he actually had, the year before he decided to compete, he went to his coach, and the coach told him, "Here's what you will need to take," and to be able to afford it, he actually did $70,000 worth of overtime the year before to be able to afford the drugs. The GH alone cost him 25 grand for his preparation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, that dude wanted it though. Anyway,
I don't know if he did.
But like, are you willing to
And he
work
actually
overtime?
he almost looked like an IFBB pro, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looked like twice as big as everybody else on stage. But the problem is actually he did not continue because he felt completely like crap, big depression, couldn't work for a month. Yeah.
And that amount of money, I mean, that's not sustainable.
Also, yeah. It's not sustainable.
Where do we find Jeremy? We'll start with you, and then we can go with Chris because I know you got some programs and stuff to kind of plug. But yeah, Jeremy, what do you got going on? Where do people find you?
Just Instagram, just coach_bell21. That's kind of all I got going on right now. I'm trying to get a YouTube page going. You know, I really love John Meadows, and I'm trying to be kind of like the local mini John Meadows. Just share stuff about training, just different exercise technique. Things and I know it's going to take a while to get the YouTube channel going, but that's something that I want to do. Like I said, I just want to share. I just want to share the stuff that I think about and tell people every day. Well,
I'll say this: like I actually, when I stopped in when I was on vacation there, that was actually, and I told you like straight up, I'm like, this is like the best I've ever seen you. But like the environment you created, I was like, damn, like. This is kind of like nostalgic for me, and so I hope that you're able to bring that, because I do think that's what's missing. Like, we're talking about all this, like, do you want it bad enough? Do you work hard enough? But like that's kind of what you created, which is cool because most people don't get there because they're too worried about Instagram. So
it is at the end of the day about having fun, right?
Yeah. I had actually a lot of fun. I actually had a pump. Weirdly, there was the first time in a while. So
I mean, that's the kind of, they're starting in Kelowna where I live. I mean, that's kind of the word now. Like, people say, I train at Rutland Barbell, and people are like, oh, that's the place where you can take your shirt off and like just go hard. Like, you guys train hard, and I'm so happy. Like, that's all I want. It's just a place, like, nothing wrong with commercial gym, but we're just not that. It's just a different environment for different people, and that's all I want.
Chris, what do we got going on? What do you want to plug? Oh, he stalled? You can't plug anything.
Yeah, it's his fault.
It froze.
I'm actually debating, do we wait for him, or do we just like tell people, like
freeze it like that, and then we'll just like plug it for him?
Yeah. Hey, he's got a bunch of
programs. He dropped it.
Gone completely.
Let's see if he comes in.
Of all of us, he's the easiest to find. So
exactly.
It's not a challenge to find him.
No, it's Thibaudeau. I think it's actually like, let's actually look at it right now. It's.
Do you guys ever watch King of the Hill? Because it was like Matthew McConaughey's character on there. It was like Bo Thibodeaux.
It's Thib Army. It's Thib Army. He's got his new workout programs, and he's pushing his YouTube page, because that's actually something he was calling it his YouTube 2.0. But like, he actually had like an hour and 20-minute mini seminar on Natty versus I always say unnatural.
That Dean didn't watch.
Yeah, but like I think his new thing is to kind of push more content via there, probably because of the quarantine. He's kind of built that, but it's kind of cool that a dude like that's even evolving where he's going at. So, other than that, check us out. Share. We always forget to say this, but you should probably just share this shit, because like I get a lot of people texting me, just fucking share it on Instagram so we can at least grow this thing. We're gonna do it anyways because it's beneficial. But it'll
be podcast too, but it's so much more fun to watch it on YouTube. It's much cooler.
Yeah, and if you don't, I guess, like, listen, our podcast is actually doing better. It gets like literally like in the hundreds, and our YouTube gets like, well, depends actually. Like the cast stuff gets like 600 views. Anyways, just fucking shit. Don't be a dick. And Jeremy, peace out. I'll just stop recording and we'll talk after.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit. I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger. Stronger.